Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, hopefully you're having an amazing day. Several slides for the PlayStation 5 Pro have leaked online, and if they are legitimate, they are very impressive indeed. The rasterisation performance for the PS5 Pro is around 45% faster than the base model console. We're looking at over 33 TFLOPS of GPU performance, and as for ray tracing, it can be between 2 to 4 times faster than the base model console. Quite frankly, there is a lot of stuff to get through here, so I'm going to kind of blaze through this information in a quick video today. In the next several days, I'll try to do a deeper dive into this stuff. I'm basically just putting this video together pretty much last minute because I was originally going to have the day off. I'll explain what's going on in just a second, but a lot of folks reached out to me on Discord, Twitter, and well, just about every means possible, so I thought I should probably just give my couple of pennies regarding this information. And yeah, so let's just kind of start with the slides. I want to give full credit to Moore's Law is Dead, or Tom, for leaking these slides. And first of all, let's just begin with the really basic stuff. So the PS5 Pro, aka the codename of Trinity, which we've heard multiple times before, I've leaked it and a few others have leaked it as well. Basically, it is a more advanced version, of course, than the base model console. You guys know the drill. Some games are going to get a patch, and that's going to improve the visuals. It's exactly the same thing as what we saw with the Xbox One to the Xbox One X, or the PS4 to the PS4 Pro. Not all games will, of course, receive a patch, but many will. And you could expect, you know, for example, Sony's like flagship titles, God of War, Ragnarok, Spider-Man 2, those kind of experiences, those are definitely going to get a patch, I would imagine. So I'm going to skip over most of that information because I think everyone knows, you know, that stuff anyway. There's not really anything particularly groundbreaking there. The GPU is larger and it uses faster system memory. I've heard it's 18 Gbps. You can see the specifications that I've personally heard before on screen just briefly. Obviously these specifications have not been verified, and unfortunately the full specs are not in these documents, but later on in the video we'll talk more about the performance and specifications anyway. So yeah, same amount of memory, which is 16 gigabytes, but it's basically running faster. Essentially the same approach Sony took with the PS4 to the PS4 Pro, just for your FYI. The rendering performance is 45% faster. And as for the GPU, they say it offers a more powerful ray tracing architecture. Between 2 to 3 times is expected for ray tracing improvements over the base model console, but in some outlier cases you can see an up to 4 times speed up. Now, there's also a custom architecture for machine learning with 300 TOPS for 8-bit computation, and they also state that it has PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. Now, as far as I understand, the SoC, or APU if you prefer, doesn't have like an NPU. All of this is being run on the GPU. That's what I've said several times, and that does seem to be repeated here because it says machine learning capabilities of the GPU. 8-bit is 300 TOPS. 62 TFLOPS of 16-bit floating point, and they basically say that the PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution essentially can support up to 8K eventually when it gets a patch. However, up to 4K is going to be available at launch basically, and the console was also essentially very similar to TAAU but incorporates machine learning for upscaling, so it has better visual quality. It doesn't need a training on a per game basis, so it's more like DLSS 2 or DLSS 3, something like that. And lastly, it has a memory requirement of 250 megabytes. So obviously some games are going to be more, some games are going to be less, but that is actually kind of a chunk of RAM given the base model console as well as the PS5 Pro both have 16 gigabytes. Now, the rumor is that the base model console as well as the PS5 Pro are going to use Zen 2. I've heard that the clock speed is going to be faster. I don't honestly know the final clocks. I've heard, well, basically maybe 800 megahertz or so faster on the CPU, but those were targets, and honestly that information could be wrong. I do not know, so obviously until it's officially confirmed, just consider that as a that's nice, but again, it's nothing confirmed. Now, the GPU and the TFLOP performance is where things get quite interesting. So how the hell is it so many TFLOPs? Well, the answer to that is quite simple: RDNA 3. Basically speaking, RDNA 3 has a radical departure in architecture versus RDNA 2, which the PS5 as well as the Xbox consoles used. You can Google RDNA-free compute units or RDNA-free dual issue if you want to kind of check this out yourself. But basically speaking, the way the FP32 units are incorporated into the compute unit, there's a bunch of different processors. I'm very much simplifying things here just to get everyone onto the same page. This is not 100% technically accurate. I really want to stress, I'm very much simplifying what I'm about to say. But basically, there are a bunch of different processors types in each compute unit. And so you have some which are good for integer performance. So an integer is, well, let's say a 1 or a 2, so 2 plus 2, that type of stuff. There's also floating point. So a floating point is obviously like 12.7345, whatever, that's a floating point. But really, again, really simple stuff. So for the floating point performance, AMD basically changed the way that the compute unit is structured so it can handle more stuff. Again, very simplified. So in terms of FP32 performance, which is how TFLOPS are calculated, that's how. So basically with the dual issue changes and all the other stuff that they did for RDNA-free, that's how we have such a big leap. However, the TFLOP performance would also indicate that one of two things has happened. One, the GPU has either had a small regression in clock frequency, because we're looking at 30 workgroup processors was one of the specifications I heard, so that would mean it would be running lower than the 2230 or whatever the base model console is. Or if it has 28 workgroup processors enabled, it would only be a small increase in clock frequency. I do not know how many compute units / workgroup processors. 2 compute units equals 1 workgroup processor. So if you have 60 compute units, it's 30 workgroup processors, just for your FYI. So what does all of this mean? Well, I've heard both 28 and 30. Most people are telling me it's 30 which is enabled on the system, but again, I'm not 100%. It could be an earlier target that was being considered, it could be misinformation. I have again heard 28 as well as 30, I'm not sure which is the correct number. So why is it then, if the system has, like, just rounding up here, 3 times the number of TFLOPS, why are we only looking at what is, in comparison, a pretty paltry uplift in rasterization performance? Well, there's several culprits. The first, and this one's a very simple one, TFLOPS don't necessarily mean much. TFLOPS are a useless, completely useless comparison from one console or one architecture to another. Because there are so many different things that can kind of come into it. It's like, if you look at Vega 64 and you compare that to like a GTX 1080, yeah, like, look at the TFLOPS, like, you know, it's like completely different, but the performance again is also kind of different. So when you start comparing different architectures and different TFLOPS, it's very difficult. And RDNA 2 to RDNA 3, the TFLOPS went up significantly. So yeah, that's one reason. The second reason is that the bandwidth hasn't increased massively either. Now, bandwidth is, well, let's say important, because if you can't physically feed the GPU, then the GPU can't get enough data, and that can be a big limiting factor. Now, yes, of course, you do have the SSD and all of that stuff before people mention that, but that doesn't mean crap, because even if the SSD was doubled or tripled in speed compared to the base model PS5, which, you know, whatever, the base model PS5 is like 5.5 gigabytes per second. That's not including decompression or whatever, but who cares? It's like nothing. The base model PS5 has like 448 gigabytes per second of GDDR6 bandwidth, and obviously the PS5 Pro is going to be faster. So just being able to pull data into the GPU fast enough and to be able to feed it is a really big point. Another thing as well is it could be just simple fill rate. So fill rate is generally the domain of the raster units, or ROPs, and what they basically do is they take the final assembled image, they take the image and basically assemble it, and that's really important because the ROPs are also for doing certain visual effects on screen. Now, ROPs are calculated with the number of ROPs, so the base model console, for example, has 64 ROPs, and then you take the clock frequency and then you multiply it. So in the case of the base model PS5, it would be 64 multiplied by 2230. In the case of the Xbox Series X, it would be the GPU clock frequency, which is 1800 and odd, again multiplied by 64. So the actual PS5 base model console has a much higher fill rate than the Xbox Series X console, despite the fact that the Series X has a much higher T-flop performance. It's just how kind of things work, and it's one reason in some cases that the PS5 actually outperforms the Xbox console, simply because of the fill rate. So in some games, you really do have like a fill rate kind of limited scenario, and in other kind of things it's a little different. It's a very complicated thing. Now, another question is, how the hell is that ray tracing performance so high? RDNA 3 definitely doesn't have those performance metrics. I have heard a figure of like 30-ish% for RDNA 4 over RDNA 3, just to be clear, not over RDNA 2. RDNA 4 is going to launch, well, it depends on who you ask. Technically, the architecture pretty much seems ready. N44 and 48 are either going to launch late this year, apparently, or maybe early next year, depending, again, on who you ask. But basically speaking, I've heard around 30% improvement in ray tracer performance from one source. So I still don't think it would hit these numbers. It's very possible Sony have done some custom stuff. I will be very interested, though, to see exactly what this machine is capable of. I definitely think it does exist. And I last heard now that a lot of studios have started to sign NDAs. So, you know, it's going to be very interesting. Now, are these slides legitimate? I honestly do not know. There are certainly a lot of elements which kind of do seem legit, but it's also very difficult to know because there are also a number of things which are simply not listed in the slides. And also, because we're kind of dealing with incomplete information, it's very difficult to know. It would be interesting to see developers weigh in on this, to see whether, even if they've not been NDA'd, to see whether these slides look like, you know, legitimate PlayStation slides. I do have some older ones for the PS4 and PS4 Pro, but they're so old now, it doesn't make any difference. Like, Sony could have totally changed how these slides look versus, you know, now, because obviously completely different branding, different console. So it will be very interesting. I will be super curious, though, to see how this console actually performs. I don't think 60 FPS is guaranteed in every single game, simply because it's going to be down to the CPU. I'll probably do another video on this in the not too distant future, but basically speaking, some games are just going to be CPU limited. So you could have a situation where you could literally run the game at like 480p and it just wouldn't make the game be able to run at 60 FPS, and it's the same thing you've got for the base model consoles. So there could be frame generation technology which is incorporated into this console. I don't know, but if you Google FSR3 frame generation, AMD's own slides do recommend that you have like kind of a higher FPS to begin with. So frame generation is literally what it says on the tin. The GPU is generating an interpreted frame between like frame A and B. It will insert a frame, so frame A will still be a thing, but frame B will now be frame C, and there'll be basically a frame in between them, which can improve things like your perception of the fluidity of the animation. Unfortunately, you can still get input latency, and it's kind of a pain. There are ways of improving it, and I'm sure companies are working on it. I've heard that's a really big thing actually for Blackwell. But we'll have to wait and see. So yeah, I will be very curious to see what these, basically I'll be very curious to see what this console is actually capable of, as well as the pricing and the performance in the market. I think for a lot of folks who have a good TV, like 120 Hz, 4K, you know, like one of the nice OLEDs or something like that, like, if the PS5 is your primary means of gaming and you can afford it, honestly, why not buy it? Because I'm primarily a PC gamer, but with that said, I do play some games on the, I just realised I'm kind of slouching down here, like kind of going down to sleep. I'm tired, sorry. Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see, because as I said, I'm primarily a PC gamer, and it's like, well, you know what, I'll probably pick up a PS5 Pro. Just, you know, some games just take a while to come out on the console, as I come out to the PC, so, So yeah, with that said, I'm going to let you all go. I was not intending to record today. Apologies for, you know, kind of a last minute video, but I was actually going to take the day off because it is my birthday. And yeah, that came around fast. So yeah, I don't know, like, Probably take maybe tomorrow off, but probably back to normal Sunday or something like that. I don't know yet. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I just turned 40, so I definitely feel like, oh, okay, that came around faster than I'd expected. But Anyway, guys, I'm gonna let you all go. I will go deeper into this in the not too distant future. I'm trying to figure out more about the slides, and I've asked a few people, but as I said, it's like, yeah, just trying to like catch up on a bunch of stuff, so it's, you know, it's going to take time to hear back from people. I will be very interested though, regardless of, you know, whether my information about the PS5 Pro or any of this stuff is, you know, legit. I will be very curious to see what Sony actually does with this system, and I think it will be a very cool console. And I'll be very interested to see the trolling Sony decides to do on Microsoft, because the thing is, Microsoft were really pushing the T-flop thing, which, as I said earlier, like, T-flops doesn't really mean much, but if Microsoft doesn't have a Pro console, and it doesn't seem that they will, I would be, I'm not going to lie to you guys, I would probably troll the crap out of Xbox. If I was Sony, because, like, they literally can do two things. One is nothing, and two is like it. Well, I guess the next generation Xbox is probably going to launch before the PlayStation 6, so I'm sure the trolling will just return. With that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.